Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into the 1920 election. It was such a pivotal moment for the U.S., wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. A huge turning point. After World War I, everything was sort of up in the air.
Right, and this election seemed to set America on a really different course.
It did. It impacted, well, everything. How America saw itself globally, what the government did at home, even just the general mood.
So let's unpack that. How did this one election reshape the decade that followed?
Well, we've got some great material here that lays it all out. It starts, really, with understanding the war itself and why Wilson's big international ideas, like the League of Nations, didn't quite take hold here.
Okay.
And then we get into Harding and his whole promise of normalcy and what that actually meant for policy and, well, for the country's direction.
Sounds good. So maybe let's start with World War I. It's kind of the essential background, isn't it? For people needing a quick refresher, what are the absolute basics to grasp?
Okay, so World War I, massive global war, mostly in Europe, from 1914 to 1918. Initially, the U.S. stance was neutrality. We wanted to stay out.
Keep out of the mess over there.
Exactly. But events like German submarine warfare, sinking ships carrying Americans, and a growing sense that we needed to defend democracy, it shifted public opinion.
And eventually the U.S. jumped in.
Yep, in 1917. And American involvement really did help the Allies win. But the cost was high, and it left a deep impression back home.
Which leads directly to the peace process. The Treaty of Versailles, that's the big one.
That's the one. Signed in 1919, it officially ended the war. But it was controversial.
How so?
Well, it was incredibly harsh on Germany. Huge reparations payments, loss of territory, strict limits on their military. The goal was lasting peace, but many felt the terms were too punitive.
And President Wilson was a major player in shaping it.
A huge player. He had his vision for a new world order based on cooperation.
Which brings us to the League of Nations, Wilson's big idea for preventing future wars.
Precisely. The League was envisioned as like an international forum, a place for countries to talk through disputes instead of fighting.
Diplomacy over war.
Right. And this concept of collective security, the idea that if one nation was aggressive, the others would band together to stop it.
Sounds logical on paper. But the U.S. famously didn't join. Why not? It was Wilson's baby, wasn't it?
It was. But back in the Senate, there was serious opposition. A lot of senators were worried about, losing sovereignty, meaning they feared that joining the League would force the U.S. into conflicts that weren't our direct concern, that we'd lose control over our own foreign policy decisions.
So dragged into other people's fights.
That was the fear. And this rejection, this failure to ratify the treaty and join the League, it really signaled a shift in American sentiment, a desire to turn inward.
And that feeling really paved the way for the 1920 election and Warren G. Harding. He won in a landslide, didn't he?
A massive landslide. Harding was the Republican candidate, an Ohio senator, and he just seemed to capture the mood of the country perfectly.
What was his appeal? His background?
He had this sort of reassuring presence, a newspaper guy turned politician. He wasn't pushing grand international schemes like Wilson. His promise was simple.
Normalcy.
Exactly, a return to normalcy. That was his campaign slogan.
It's an odd word, normalcy. What did that actually mean to people exhausted by war and maybe by Wilson's idealism?
It meant getting back to the way things felt before the war. Less government intervention, less focus on global problems, more attention on American business and American life.
A return to simpler times, maybe? Or at least what seemed simpler.
Kind of. It tapped into that weariness with the war effort, the sacrifices, the big progressive reforms Wilson had pushed. People wanted a break. They wanted to focus inward.
So normalcy becomes almost synonymous with isolationism, pulling back from the world stage.
It definitely fueled that trend, yes. Isolationism is about avoiding those political and economic entanglements with other countries. After the whole League of Nations debate, many Americans were thinking, let's focus on us.
A definite pivot from Wilson's vision.
A huge pivot. Wilson saw America's role as leading the world towards cooperation. Harding, and the voters who elected him, saw America's role as, well, minding its own business more.
But it wasn't like the U.S. just shut the door completely, was it? I seem to remember some international efforts during the 20s.
No, you're right. It wasn't total isolation. A key example is the Washington Naval Conference.
Yes. Held in D.C.
Right. In 1921-22, its main goal was pretty specific: to stop a naval arms race that was brewing between the big powers, the US, Britain, Japan, etc.
So trying to prevent war by limiting weapons.
Exactly. They agreed on limits for battleships and aircraft carriers. It showed the U.S. was still willing to engage internationally, but maybe more selectively. Focused on practical things like preventing conflict rather than broad political alliances like the League.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the Kellogg-Briand Pact later on?
Kellogg-Briand, that came in 1928. It was, well, very
What did
idealistic.
it do? Or try to do?
Basically, dozens of nations signed it, agreeing to renounce war as an instrument of national policy. They essentially promised not to fight each other to achieve their goals.
Sounds great, but
But yeah, it had no teeth, no enforcement mechanism. If a country broke the promise, there wasn't much anyone could do based on the pact itself.
so more symbolic than practical.
Very much so. It reflected that strong desire for peace after World War I, but perhaps a bit naively. Still, it fits that pattern of wanting peace, but maybe not wanting the deep commitments the League required.
Got it. Now let's shift back home. Harding's normalcy. You mentioned less government intervention. Did that apply to the economy too?
Oh, absolutely. That was a core part of it. The Harding administration and the Republican administrations that followed in the 20s really favored what we call laissez-faire economics.
Laissez-faire. French for let it be or leave it alone.
Exactly. The idea is minimal government interference in the economy. Lower taxes, fewer regulations on business. The belief was this would unleash business growth and prosperity.
Let business do its thing.
Pretty much. And the economy did boom in the 20s, but this hands-off approach arguably contributed to some underlying problems that,
Yeah.
well, surfaced later.
Right, setting the stage for future issues. Now, Harding's presidency isn't just remembered for normalcy or laissez-faire, is it? There was a darker side. The Ohio Gang.
Yeah, that's a major stain on his legacy. The Ohio Gang was this nickname for Harding's group of political allies and buddies, many from Ohio, whom he appointed to high office.
Cronyism. Appointing friends.
Big time. And unfortunately, many of them were, well, corrupt. They saw government service as a chance to enrich themselves.
Not exactly the normalcy people might have hoped for.
No. It led to multiple scandals and really eroded public trust. Harding himself wasn't directly implicated in profiting, but he appointed these guys. The buck stopped with him.
And the most famous scandal involving this group has to be Teapot Dome.
Teapot Dome is the big one. It's become shorthand for government corruption in that era.
Can you break it down simply what happened?
Sure. Basically, the Secretary of the Interior, a guy named Albert Fall, part of that Ohio gang network, secretly leased government-owned oil reserves. These were lands set aside for the Navy in Wyoming, Teapot Dome, and California.
Leased them to who?
To private oil companies run by guys named Harry Sinclair and Edward Doheny. And crucially, he did it without competitive bidding.
So a sweetheart deal.
Yeah.
Why would he do that?
Because they bribed him. Fall got hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and loans. It was blatant corruption selling off public resources for personal gain.
Wow. And this came out.
It did after Harding's death, actually. Fall eventually went to prison for bribery. It was a huge scandal, really confirmed people's worst fears about the Ohio gang, and damaged the reputation of the government.
So we've got this shift in foreign policy, economic policy changes, political scandals. What about the culture? Did the war and the election aftermath change how people felt, how artists and writers saw things?
Definitely. You see this reflected powerfully in the Lost Generation.
The writers and artists like Hemingway, Fitzgerald.
Exactly. These were folks who came of age during or right after World War I. They experienced the war's brutality, or at least its shattering effect on old beliefs, and then saw the sometimes shallow materialism or the disillusionment of the post-war era.
So they felt lost.
Yeah, a sense of alienation, a loss of faith in traditional values, in progress, in the ideals their parents' generation might have held before the war. Their work often explores themes of disillusionment, aimlessness, the search for meaning in a changed world.
So their perspective really captures that shift away from pre-war optimism.
It really does. It's a cultural echo of the political and social shifts happening. The normalcy people voted for maybe wasn't fulfilling, or maybe the war had just changed things too profoundly to ever go back.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Looking back, the 1920 election really seems like a clear fork in the road for America.
No question. It marked a decisive move away from Wilsonian internationalism towards, Well, maybe not pure isolationism, but certainly a more inwardly focused foreign policy. We saw that with rejecting the League, but still engaging selectively with things like the Washington Naval Conference or
And
Kellogg-Briand,
domestically.
a shift from progressive era activism towards more conservative, laissez-faire economics. Big business was definitely favored in the 20s.
And the national moon change, too.
Yeah, that desire for normalcy, which also coincided with the cultural disillusionment captured by the Lost Generation. Plus, you had the rise of Harding and the subsequent problems with corruption, like the Ohio Gang and Teapot Dome, which shook public faith.
It really does sound like 1920 set the stage for so much what defined the Roaring Twenties, the good and the bad.
I think that's fair to say. The boom, the culture, the politics, but also maybe some of the underlying issues that would contribute to the crash later on. It shows just how consequential an election can be.
Really fascinating. So for everyone listening, as you think more about this deep dive into the 1920 election, here are a few questions to ponder.
Good idea. Like, what was really the main feeling behind that push for normalcy after the war?
Yeah, and how exactly did the U.S. lean towards isolationism in the 20s? Were there clear exceptions we talked about?
And think about the impact of the Ohio Gang and Teapot Dome. How did those scandals really affect how people viewed the government back then?
Also, how do the experiences and writings of the Lost Generation mirror the broader changes in American society after World War I?
And maybe a final thought. Considering the outcome of the 1920 election, what do you see as the biggest changes from the pre-war era? What truly marked the departure?
Lots to think about there. It really was a transformative moment. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today.